Hello, this is Fiona, one of the co-hosts of the DM's Book Club, a weekly book club podcast where we read about some Dungeons & Dragons and discuss how we might include them in our role-playing campaigns. In this episode, I got to chat with game designer David Somerville about his latest RPG work, The Star Shaman Song of Planegea, the prehistoric fantasy setting for 5th edition, published by Atlas Games. Gone are the safe halves of taverns and libraries, kingdoms and cathedrals. Planegea is a place of utter wildness, where survival is the only law, and it must be carved from the world by force of might and magic. Drawn from the traditions of source and sorcery pulp adventures, infused with blood-pounding thrills of the Fury Road, and caught in the jaws of primordial dreams, Planegea has adventures for everyone who's ever felt the cold wind raise a chill of the hunt and hope on their raw skin. Planegea rises out of our earliest ancestral memory, a world we can barely recognise, which holds all the adventure we can imagine. You won't find limitations on class or kingship here. Rather, the world is filled with ideas and inspiration for running a long and glorious game set before words, hammered ore, and ploughed fields. Nothing is what you expect in Planegea. The planes of existence have not yet separated, and a warrior can travel by foot from the sea of stars to the infinite volcanic peak of Blood Mountain. But along the way, that warrior must battle everything from cold alien intelligences to genie caravans, from the 4 empires of the giants to monsters that hunt the howling peaks and roaring oceans that ring the Great Valley, from the cold, bony fingers of the nightmare world to the terrifying jaws of the jungle, known as the Venom Abyss. Every step of the journey is plagued with danger and death. Planegea is now out in digital PDF, with physical copies looking to be released in the new year. I'll put a link to all the information and to Atlas Games in the episode description. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy. Well, we'll just start off very, very simply. Who
Great.
are you and what do you do?
I'm David Somerville. I am a graphic designer, creative director by day, and a game designer by night, or really very early morning is my best creative time, I think, when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep. So yeah, I in the recent past, I created and worked with Atlas Games to publish The Star Shaman Song of Planegea, which is a Stone Age setting for 5th edition. And it's been a lot of fun to work on, and great fun to see it come to life.
Yeah. How long have you been working on it, if you don't mind me asking? Because I know the Kickstarter at time of recording was about a year ago when it funded, and now it's finally coming out into the world.
Yeah. I began in mid to late 2018. My family was getting ready to embark on this journey. We were, I was from the Washington, D.C. area. My wife and I had 3 kids, decided that area is very stressful and we don't feel like we need to remain there. So I let go of the job that I had, took up work as a remote graphic designer. We let go of our lease on our house, bought an RV, and spent a year traveling America trying to find a new hometown to raise our kids in. And it was while I was preparing the RV for that trip that all of the wheels started to turn on this. So I was driving across America, looking at wild landscapes I had never imagined before, encountering all sorts of new vistas and horizons, and dreaming up some of this. But then it was really pretty much coinciding with the pandemic that the real work began. May of 2020 was when I released the first public sort of bit for people to see. And then, as you said, kickstarted last year. So it's been in stages over time.
Absolutely. So we'll go on to Planegea in a second. So I always find interesting, do you mostly get your inspiration, like you said, you're a graphic designer as well. Do you mostly get your inspiration from like environments and locations and stuff, rather than say, a video game or a book or something like that? Because a lot of times when I ask that, obviously people are like, a whole range of things, but because obviously it's such a unique experience to be traveling and seeing all these different environments as you're passing through. Yeah,
I definitely think it has a huge impact. I think, if you look at, just speaking of graphic design or advertising, if you look at environments like London or New York that are so stimulating and saturating, you see a different kind of design than, in small suburbia or little villages. And then a whole nother kind, if you're in a coast versus in sort of landlocked. And I remember for myself, I grew up in the suburbs of DC in this very sort of like hilly suburban area. And I think it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized I lacked a sense of scale and proportion.
Right.
Everything in suburbia is sort of human sized. And with the little hills that we have, you never saw too much of anything. It was all sort of like under control. And as I traveled more and saw huge skies and enormous mountains and a lot more things, it sort of opened up inspiration for the possibilities of scale. So I think that it definitely has an effect. I don't know that I would say it has more of an effect than what you're reading or whatever, but I think, I did a lot of research for the origins of the literature that created D&D during this. And it was really interesting to look at the difference between Howard, who wrote the Conan stories, and of course, I'm going to forget his name now, the author of the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories, the Lankmar stories. And Howard was a Texan guy who like lived out in the land and like kind of didn't have a good relationship with the city. So he wrote about this barbarian. And then the author of the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories was extremely urban, and his stories are just saturated with all of this sort of like the city is a character. So I think the environment shapes us, and then we create literature or art that is a response to that environment, and that inspires others, whether or not they share that environment.
Interesting, because I'm thinking, because I am obviously based in London myself, and in the UK as well, whilst we do have a little bit of the maybe wildness that you're sort of referring to, it's not compared to the US. My partner is from Iowa.
Nice.
Right, so we've done our own various road trips and stuff, and it is vastly different, like when you go up to say Nebraska or anything like that, and it's just we just don't have that on the same scale. So I totally appreciate what you're saying about like you live somewhere all your life and then you go out, you take that first step onto adventure, and it's such a different scale. And
exactly. And I think the thing that like is wild to me about London is the scale of time, which we don't have here in the States. And just like, reading stories about laying digging out new underground tunnels and finding woolly mammoth bones. And just like that is striking. And that's just like under the city where you all live all the time. And it's still
remarkable. Happens. You hear about it every couple of months that they found something whilst they're excavating and everything has to stop and stuff. Yeah. Let's talk about Planegea then. So first of all, for those people who haven't heard of the setting, what is it, and how does it stand out to other campaign settings? How would you say it changes the perceptions of what it's supposed to be? Well,
Planegea is prehistoric fantasy, and I think more specifically prehistoric sword and sorcery. So it is a full, rich campaign setting, a big old thick book or PDF with sort of everything you need to run a campaign, with character options, spells, monsters, good and evil factions, maps and locations, the whole 9 yards. So you could think of it sort of like one of the books that's come out for Eberron or Ravnica, so any sort of good, rich setting book. What makes it distinct is that it is set in the Stone Age, and its point of view is your characters are brilliant, creative, smart, interesting, capable, creative adventurers in the Stone Age. So it really sort of says from the beginning, you can play, Grog the Barbarian in any age, and you can play him here, but that's not the limits of this. Right. You can bring all of your ingenuity and sense of humor and intelligence to this. But because of certain factors, you are in the Stone Age. And what that means is metal's not available, writing's not available, the wheel isn't available, and everything is savage, everything is dangerous, everything is ready to rip you apart. You are hunted. You can take almost nothing for granted. Everything is in flux. Monsters might be different. They're sort of like the circle of firelight that you are in is pretty much the safe zone. And then outside, and even that, like maybe not. I was really inspired by the method by which Keith Baker built Eberron. And he talks about building a setting as stacking crates of dynamite. And so it's an attempt at that, and a really sort of expressing sword and sorcery classic tropes that the game arises from with a 5th edition sensibility. You really hit it home in all the writing, saying it's not what you expect because of this image that people think of, like Stone Age. Oh yes, Grog the Barbarian. People don't speak and it's all very vicious and combat, but low intelligence.
And that's not it at all. And you, again, kudos to your writing, I know. And this could be easily a compliment sort of pile on, but you instantly say that's not what this is at all. And like you said, those few changes of factors, like the fact that, without the metal, we don't have coin, we don't have a big money finance thing. So it's all traded in salt. And then how do you work that? And so you've gone into so much detail about it, and it instantly just opens up like, oh, if this is true, what else is true? Yeah. And I think one of the highlights for me is, because sometimes I can imagine when people go, but what about this? And you've gone, well, there is a table that sort of translates a medieval fantasy thing, what its equivalent would be in the Stone Age. And I think that's just so helpful because obviously, like you sort of mentioned it there, the clan fire, that is sort of the replacement as a community center, a tavern per se. And, that's where you get your notice, that's where you meet friends, and that's where you stay protected. But then it's like, okay, but what about other things? And you're like, oh, easy enough. Here's a list.
Yeah. I had a light bulb moment where it's like, I don't really, I act like I know about medieval things, but it's all just drawn from Disney or, whatever. It's just like, it's from this, like, it's a stack of tropes. There is, on a geological scale, the Stone Age and the medieval age are right next to each other, right? They're far from us. They are a long time ago for both of us. And so it's like, if you want to do those things, if you want to ride out into the wilderness and have adventures, really, it's not that hard to do in the Stone Age if you just sort of click your brain 2 notches backwards.
Exactly.
And easier for me because I'm not mechanically minded. So it's easier than steampunk or other things where you have to sort of say, well, how does the steam engine work? Or what's my explanation here? It's all just, everything is immediate, tactile, graspable. You can see where the knots are that you can untie to bring everything tumbling down.
Absolutely. And again, like, I guess for me as well, like lots of fantasies, because it feels very close to now. So like you said, like the structures, the hierarchies and stuff, we still have kingdoms, we still have these sort of structures. Take that back a couple of notches. Like you said, we don't have this. We have to go right back to the start. Like, how did it all begin? And certainly when you're sort of developing, like you look at you call them kingships, which kudos, as such a great word, by the way, about, the elves and the dwarves stuff. And you're like, well, there's none of this history already. We're at the beginning. Yeah. These are individuals, not legacies. And I was like, oh, so instantly we're not going to have, you just take that away, go, right, you are just these people forced together. It doesn't matter what you may think, what baggage comes with it, you just are these people. And I was like, oh, I am now intrigued by this, because obviously
that's great.
But it's true, because a lot of 5th edition, obviously the talk of it now, there's still this talk about it, and I think you did such a great job with that. And let's talk about the kingships a little bit, if you're okay with that.
Great.
So you've got a couple of new kingships in it. I wondered if you're okay to talk about those. That's all right.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah, it was really fun for all of the kinships, asking, if you take away sort of like Lothlorien from elves, what are elves, right? And take away the dwarves, like, this is how our ancestors have always done it. Like, no, you're the ancestors. You're figuring out what is dwarf like about that. For the new ones, one of the ideas is, if you look back at evolution and what we know about history, there's a long time where it's not clear that mammals will be the survivors.
Right.
And in a magical world, it's not even clear. Well, I guess in our world too, like that life will form at all, or like carbon-based, biological life, or that the plants won't run everything. So what we kind of do here is we look at what are non-mammal, non-human-ish kind of kinships that would be interesting to explore to get that primordial weirdness, right? Everything is competing. Everything is like on an equal footing, just like fighting to survive. So the 4 that we have in the book are the Saurians. So you have 4 different types of dinosaur folk, which are a lot of good fun. They have this sort of tie to necromancy and relationships with their ancestors and ability to sort of sense spirits, as well as being big, strong, scaly folk. There are the Dreas, which are walking trees. This is my pitch for this is when you mash up a tree in The Little Mermaid, and it's just like, I want to be part of their world.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So much fun. Such a like sweet spirited, but also very unpredictable idea. I there's a lot of dark stuff in this book because it is like primordial horror is one of the pillars, and it's intended to be scary, and the Dryas can be very scary, and there is a tree villain that they can be all tied into. But I think there's something very light and kind of wonderful about the idea of just like, you are a tree who decided to walk and to see the world. It's kind of
it's so simple, that, isn't it? Like this idea of having sleeping trees and waking trees and like the roving forest and all that sort of thing. I was like, yeah, that's so cool. And I was just like, I want to play a walking tree. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know. Me too. I would love to play that. So much of this was sort of looking at the really great fantasy and thinking, okay, how do we rewind that? And so, I mean, this is easily and obviously taken from Tolkien, where he's talking about like at the start, the trees were awake and they were walking around and doing stuff. And so, if you take that all the way to this idea that just like most trees are mostly awake in this time, it sort of changes your relationship to everything. Yeah. And then there is the half ooze, which is a oozy humanoid.
I love it, but also
the opposite of the uplifting Dryas. It is like the most depressing and edgelordy option available. But you're kind of if you've seen Men in Black, when the guy is wearing the Edgar suit and sort of the bug who's walking around like a person, it's got sort of that feel. There's a feeling of sort of monstrousness and decay and a lost identity and a lot of mystery built into whose body have you taken over. It's a real creepy one. And then the last is the starling, because the idea is that the stars are not still. They dance in the heavens every night, and they're sort of constantly moving like a sea of fireflies above you. And the stars are a very active part of Planegea. You can learn secrets from them and get guidance from them. And they duel every morning to see which star will take the role of the sun. And sometimes they fall from heaven and find themselves basically castaways in this world. So they are also energy beings, also a lot of good fun.
And you sort of brought it back there as the environment you are in, it feels so alive, obviously, because the elements are still sort of coming together. It's constantly moving. You've got the one land, the one sky, and like you said, the stars fighting. And again, it never stops. Whereas I think sometimes maybe in fantasy and stuff, obviously you have that moment of rest or something like that. But I think you mentioned it before, this idea of unpredictability. You leave the clan fire, you're traveling to who knows where, working things out. You don't know what the next day is going to be. You're always hungry. You're always hunting. And there's just something exciting about that. It's something just so unknown, maybe to me as a DM, but also to players. You're like, actually, this sounds fun. What could we do with this?
Exactly. Right. And it puts you in that primal place where you can't take anything for granted. Exactly. And you can be a brilliant, like intelligence 20 person, wisdom 20 person, know how to navigate the world, but the world is continually changing. So it's not a chess game, right? It's sort of like, I should have another, it's dodgeball. Everything is always moving all the time.
Yeah, but you don't get hit by something because then you're just dead.
Or you do.
And I wanted to quickly sort of mention on this. So as you said, like this sort of the environment is alive, but then this idea of there is this sort of metaphysical force, the hounds of blind heaven, this idea of there are taboos still in this world, that even though it's just like we're just beginning, there are still rules. And I thought this was great, this idea that there's no numbers over 9, anything over 9 is many. And I just thought that to me would be such a great reveal as a DM, just be like, there are many of them. How many? Many.
I love that. I love that when you're talking about how many goblins are out in front of us, you're like, many. And that is so scary as a player, not to know if you're talking about 11 or 100. And then what you have to do is start using analogies, right? They fill the valley, or, there are enough to like chop down a tree easily. And you start kind of finding these other ways of expressing how many you're talking about. For anyone who hasn't read the book, don't worry, you're allowed to use numbers.
It's not like you
can use all the numbers you want.
I can imagine, you roll a d20. Yeah, what did you get? Oh, many. Oh, what you hit? It's not like that at all. But
that would be a fun one shot. I would play that one shot.
It's just but then we're just like many. But my AC is many, so you don't hit. But also you have stuff like there's no writing, because obviously writing invites these sort of things in. So it's all like you think about your changes and what does that change? If this is true, what else is true? And this idea of like wizards and sorcerers, the spell skins, their spells are on the walls in drawings around where they are. And so people could just go in and copy them down and stuff. And so it's just like, it's just, again, like, so that sort of box of dynamite where you go, so there's so much from that little change of like, there's no writing.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah. Your wizards or spellskins have to sort of do cave paintings to work out their spells, which they can then copy onto their bodies in a sort of a permanent way. And it's great. Just as a DM, this is one of my favorite moments. And I lean on it maybe a little too much, where part of the adventure is you stumble across a spell that's drawn across a wall. And if you have a spell skin in the party, they can copy it down at like finding a spell scroll. But it's also just the set piece. And it's also, where is the spell skin? Like, what happened to them? And it's a mystery and a spell scroll and an environment wrapped into one. It's just, it's a lot of fun.
Again, it's all those little adapting changes and stuff like that. So it just makes it so different and so fresh.
Yeah.
So obviously, as you sort of alluded to, it's over 300 pages. It's a hefty
It's a big book.
It's a big book. I know you sort of talk about your experience about like how you sort of came into it. Like you said, you sort of were traveling and you watched various films and stuff like that. Where did you start in terms of writing this piece? Was there like, I want to write this setting itself? Or did you focus on like the smaller bits going, I want to change, see what there is in 5th edition and adapt it? Because this is the thing, you like you said, there's some brand new stuff, but there's also some really lovely adaptations saying like, if you want to play this particular class, you can do. Here's just some ways to fit it into the setting. So where did you start?
The inspiration from the beginning was, I am a 5th edition kid. I came into this all pretty recently, or actually my first session was like at the very, 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 very end of 4th edition. And I played maybe 2 games of that and then clicked over to 5th. So technically got in under the wire, but no, I'm as old as this edition in my love of the game. And so I learned about, though, the WotC fantasy setting search that led to Eberron, where, Wizards of the Coast put out this prompt. They said, send us 1 page about a new setting idea. It has to have these elements and we'll look at them and we'll pick, and then you'll advance to 10 pages and then 100 pages. And then we'll choose the winner. And Eberron was the winner for this. And, not having been there and sort of being creative and I guess having an ego, I was like, okay, well, what would I have done for that? And I started scribbling out a few ideas. I wish I could remember what the other ones were, but I honestly can't. The one that really was like, wait, was Stone Age. And I just learned that there was a Stone Age setting. I think it was Dawnforge that came out of the same thing, which I now have to look into because I was unaware of that. Oh no. So, but I think it's okay. I think I'm pretty happy with what I did. But yeah, so the prompt has really great guidance. It's sort of like a big concept sentence. It asks, who are your heroes and what do they do? Who are the villains and what do they do? How does magic work? It's just some really sort of basic questions, and it wasn't allowed to be more than a page. So I wrote that for myself and looked at it. I was like, okay, yeah, this sounds neat. And it's funny. The first page of, of chapter 1 of the book actually has cut and pasted copy from that first page still. That's awesome. So yeah. And so I really challenged myself to follow that structure. I wrote 1 page. I got really happy with it. Then I expanded it to a 10 page. I think it was 12 technically. And from there, I was like, all right, let me try for 100. And then 100 became 400, with art. That was really how it evolved. And I owe a huge debt to Keith Baker and all of his brilliant thinking that he outlined in the Manifest Zone podcast, where he talks about each thing. He talked about what I've sought to do, which is everything in D&D exists here, but it might not be what you think. And that's right what I wanted to pursue. If it's in the game, it's in Planegea. Its role is probably not quite what you expect. And then also to the Appendix N Book Club podcast, which goes through the stories that inspired the game. That was really like a masterclass on sword and sorcery, which I had not known much about before that, and locked in what I wanted to go for. And then finally, it's really a setting powered by podcasts, come to think of it. The Mastering Dungeons podcast with Sean Merwin and Teo Sabadia. They go through chapter by chapter, really scene by scene, modern books. I remember Icewind Dale specifically. They were just like really analyzing, and they're both brilliant designers. And so I think I sort of learned about the beginning of the game from the Appendix N Book Club podcast. I learned about how to theoretically craft a setting from Keith Baker's Manifest Zone. And then I learned about modern 5e design from Mastering Dungeons, and just like so much gratitude to all of those along the way.
Yeah, no, that's incredible because, just to have that sort of certain structure. And then I love that, a bit of an ego, but I think you need that as any RPG writer. You want to push yourself forward and make sure you do it. Right. So like you said, so when you did it, you 400 pages, but also, I mean, the artwork, we have to talk about the artwork is, first of all, there's so much of it, but all of it is beautiful. It really, like, you're writing yourself, obviously, it gives you that visual stuff. I know you talk about the five senses, everything's moving, etc. But you really get that with all of the artwork. And like, do you know how many pieces of artwork you have or how many artists work on it?
No, I don't. I should count sometime. I have no idea. It's many.
Yes. Yeah, it's many. Because you've got like 2 pages at the beginning, obviously, with all of their credits and stuff. And I'm just like, wow, like it's just, and I think this is the thing for me is that if I was going to run a campaign in Planegea, I would definitely have those images to hand to show people. Because again, just to break that, this is not what you think, it's not what you expect. And just show them there because there's some incredible ones. Do you have a particular favorite piece? I know it's going to be hard. There's so many of them.
I mean, there are so many. It's nice though, because my favorite is the cover by Anna Podedwarna. It is, so the game has, or the setting has 3 pillars, which is kinetic action, primordial horror, and mystic awe or mystic wonder. And I think too, that piece, which has awesome primordial woman who is, running through fire on the back of a woolly unicorn. It's very sort of kinetic action, casting a spell. Got undead T-Rexes chasing her. The primordial horror is right there. And then she's like got her hand uplifted, is calling on sort of a constellation that forms a dragon, which is mystic awe. And so this piece to me is Planegea in an image.
Absolutely.
I love it.
It's really striking as well. Like you said, with the fire and the undead T-Rexes. It's just like, wow, really cool. Good choice as well. And also an easy one to find because it's at the beginning of the book. But yes.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I do have to say that we worked with so many talented artists.
Yes.
And one of them, I actually don't know where the emphasis is in the pronunciation of his name. I'm going to say Malada, but it may be Malada, or he's an artist that I believe is based in Spain, and he's brilliant. And he did so many pieces for us that are really amazing. A lot of our chapter openers are by him. And there's one that's sort of maybe the counterpoint to that, which I personally find just so brilliant and compelling. It's on, what page is it? Let's find out. 282.
282.
It's the beginning of the gods and monsters section, but it's the villainous Twir, the sort of Minotaurus ox god.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah.
It's so great. I could pick any number of his pieces, but this one in particular is sort of, it's almost the inverse of the cover. It is wondrous in sort of its scale. It's kinetic in terms of her rising up, and then it is terrifying. So there are a lot.
And the other thing to say as well, like, again, I know we keep emphasizing the Stone Ageness of it, but you do talk about like saying that you don't have to be Stone Age, you don't have to be the origins of it, could be something completely different. So you mentioned obviously time travel, so people could just land in Planegea, but also if it's a sort of futuristic one. So instantly comes to my mind something like Horizon Zero Dawn, obviously the video game, anything like that. And I was just like, oh, that would be so cool to have those sort of almost like Mad Max Fury type style. So you're, again, trying to break away from this stereotypical image of like, people huddling around the campfire, but not having the intelligence to do it. And I was just like, actually, what a great way. It doesn't have to be past, it could be future, but past, and the earth has taken over. And so I just thought that was such a great bit of writing on that front.
Oh, thank you so much. One of my earliest concept that might even have been the thing that launched the project was the idea of Mad Max with mammoths. And I think just like Fury Road, actually I have a pet project where I'm trying to write an adventure that just like is explicitly Fury Road set in Planegea. Nice. Which I think would be, as long as it's honest about what it is, I think it would be a good time.
Yeah, I agree.
There are sort of 3 or 4 really fun viewpoints on when this world is happening. One is sort of, this is post-apocalyptic. And I know Justin Alexander, who is iconic, and B, head of RPGs at Atlas, and C, my developer and editor for the project, really likes this. So this is at the end. I've got some stuff in there that says, well, it really might be. I mean, there's a Stone Age artificial intelligence called Deep Thought in the book, which is like, is that a computer? Is that the last computer? It might be. It might be something else. And that's very early D&D. Like there wasn't a separation between sci-fi and fantasy then. They were just, you'd have your wizard, he'd come across a supercomputer and some mutants, and it was just like all mixed together. So I love that. There's others who think of it as cyclical, that like Planegea is a world that keeps on destroying and reinventing itself, and it sort of is its own thing. One of the core developers of the setting really loves this idea, and just like this thing exists and keeps on reinventing itself. And this might be the 100 millionth Planegea. It might be the 4th, and it's cyclical. And what I personally like to believe, and what it was sort of written towards, but it doesn't have to be, is that this is, the name suggests this is before the planes of existence break apart. Right. Mm-hmm. And I like to think of it as this is the world that precedes the Forgotten Realms or many campaign settings. And a lot of what's in the book is intentionally built to be like, okay, this is true now. It's clearly different in the future. How and why? And I've got one thing in particular there that is just like subtle but interesting for me. I like this. In the dwarves, it says like, giants and dwarfs love each other. Like they are pals, and it's great. Yeah. And if you know anything about Norse mythology, that is not true. So no. What happened? When? Why? How? Like that's a campaign seed. And so a lot of these are built, there are no universal gods, but there are these local gods. Yes. How do they evolve? Right? There are no metallic dragons. How do they come to be? So the way I like to write the setting is it's all leading up. This is sort of pre-apocalyptic. It's leading up to what's going to be the end of their world and the start of the worlds that we know.
Kudos to you. Yeah, because I really love dwarves, and I think they sometimes get a bit of a bad rap in sometimes. And I also love giants as well. So when I saw that, I was like, yay, they are.
Well, can I tell you a secret?
Absolutely.
This will probably be released by the time this airs. Yeah. But we have sort of revived our Patreon, which was really dormant for a while. And right now I'm working on, and knock on wood, we'll have released primal dwarves. So 4 dwarf subtypes based on different types of stone. So whether you're a volcanic dwarf or a sedimentary dwarf or a crystal dwarf or a metamorphic dwarf, they have different, all expressing dwarfness, but like also the stone from which they're hewn. I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited about it now. Yeah. There's just something about, like you said, like they are carved from the stone. These original dwarves. And like, you don't have to do that. I know you do that sort of out as well, but I'm just like, instantly makes it just like, oh, that's so different. And and like the elves as well, coming from the land of Nod, which again you refer to, the idea of the twin worlds of like the lands of dreams and nightmares. Again, I'm like, what's that about? Right. I think, and just looking at it all, like, kudos to your writing, but I did that. All the words, all the locations have really visual sounding names. So like Blood Mountain, Venom Abyss, the apparent vaults and stuff. I'm like, well, I want to go. What's that about? So
right.
That's always the key thing to me, is always having a good name or a good naming thing, because names are so important in Planegea. I know, but it's just something about like just the naming of these places, and like this idea of the you got the fangs of the world as well. This idea that people talk about Planegea as like this big mouth with the fangs out your side, which is all these elements, and I was like, cool. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I just reading my notes. Cool. Yes.
Oh, tick. I love it. I'm so glad. There was a moment of doubt about 3/4 of the way through the project where I posted up a survey and said, hey, I don't have invented names. Like I was looking at it, I was like, really everything is like what it says on the tin. You've got the Bear Clan and you've got Blood Mountain. And, there are a few made up names, like the giant cities all have given names. But I was just like, is this bad? Like, is this ruining your fun? And the strong reaction was like, this is great. We love this. Yeah. So because it makes sense that people will just be straightforward and simple in naming things. Because and then also, and maybe just a thing for me is that I have real bad time pronouncing things. Right. So I was like, oh, great. Phew. Blood Mountain. Everyone knows Blood Mountain. Yeah, exactly. There's some other fun things about the naming too, which is for most given names, there are sort of 3 tricks to the given names. One is I made a name generator. So I used that. Yes, and that was pulled from names from Far Cry Primal, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and 1 or 2 other things where I was like pulling apart the syllables for those. And I had to make sure you could use it to generate all of the key names from all of those things because it had to make sense. But most of the gods' names and a lot of the other specific names are drawn from the Proto-Indo-European glossary, sort of the language. Again, Far Cry Primal, I think they tried to create a spoken version of this. So the names, especially of gods, tie to some of our earliest words for ideas. So the names of the dragons, I think, for example, they're named for those colors. And so when you have like Quaidos, which is the white dragon, there's something your sound memory hears that's like, yeah, that feels right because it's coming from these sort of pre-word, like words that formed our language. And then for the giants, I just made it up because I wanted them to feel different and other and like not be as logical to us and sort of make them scarier by having less structure that we can grasp onto.
Yeah, no, and you definitely get that as well. We've not really mentioned it, but this book is obviously split into two. You have sort of the primer bit for the players at the beginning, and then you have what I can only describe as a massive toolbox of the DM saying like, here's all the stuff you may need and stuff like that. And I think it's been one of the most detailed books in terms of like, you give examples, obviously you show the map of Planegea, and here's some big settlements you can put in, but then you go into so much detail, both for the DM and for the player, about creating your own stuff. So for example, with the players, you really go into detail about like how important, your birth is. Were you born under several sons? Were you done this? And breaking it down. And for some people that might not be something that they want. But for me, I'm like, that's to really create Planegea characters and stuff, and similarly with settlements as well. And I've not come across this, so apologies if I seem like a complete noob. This idea of the dice drop thing, where like you roll your elements, but where they land on your paper, not only does it determine the elements in that sort of settlement, but also where it is physically. And I was like, yay! I was like, that sounds a lot of fun, because otherwise you're just dice rolling and go, writing it down. I was like, I can actually be creative, actually do something physical.
Yes,
it's really fun.
It's so much fun. I love it. Yeah, the player stuff was really inspired when Xanathar's came out and it had the "This Is Your Life" tables. I was just obsessed with those. I would just sit there and roll after roll after roll to see what happened. I was like, this is what I've been missing and the thing that I've needed so much. And so, because it's not in the core books, you can't reference it. It's on the SRD. So those tables are an homage to how great Xanathar's "This Is Your Life" tables are. For the dice drops, I think I forget which product I saw it in, but it was some indie, not D&D RPG. I think it is an old technique, but not one that I was familiar with either for a long time. But it was great. It was just like, you chuck your dice on the table, and where they fall, that's where things are. It was really fun for me too, because like I have a very messy desk. So I'll actually just like drop it onto my desk or I'll like throw a towel or a jacket on the floor and toss them on there. Nice. And then you've got terrain and elevation as well, which is a lot of fun. And there's I remember I took an art history class in college, and they were talking about surrealist art and saying how they really employed chance in their artwork. Like they would cut up pieces of paper and toss them into the air and make art from where they fell, because they thought that there was a connection between the random and the subconscious. And I think for us, when we are playing a game that embraces randomness, where your characters are elements of chaos, where it's all about the dice, you can make meticulously mapped dungeons that are sort of every square inch is accounted for. But especially in this world where everything is shifting and unpredictable, embracing that sort of subconscious storytelling through randomness, just tossing the dice and letting that be the story felt very correct. It felt like everything was all locked in and locked together. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I was reading some of the reviews as well, and they're saying like the fact this feels like one of the most complete settings where you could just pick it up and go, but then you could spend hours of going through it, and everything you need or things that you might not think about, it's there, but it's in a way that's not very it's not like you must do all these things before you start an adventure. So like you talk about in great detail about like what it is like to be a part of a clan community, having those sort of shamans, like developing weapons and stuff like that. What does that mean, etc. But it's written in a way that like, here's some things to consider when you're creating stuff. And I was just like, this, because it's going to be so different to what we know as a fantasy town.
So you're going to have to need that. But it was just done in such a way. And then obviously having examples of it as well.
Right.
And then on top of that, having towards sort of the end of these factions and threats, which is, I love that you will have politics still in some form. And like, are you going to have allegiances to these factions? Are you going to be one of these people that goes and sorts out one of the threats, or are you going to align with it? So I just thought there's so much, isn't it? There's so much, but it was just a joy to read and just rethink about how we play our settings that aren't just a carbon copy of what we might know now.
I'm so glad it worked like that. Thank you for saying that. I think there are so many different ways of DMing and so many different approaches to what a table wants, what excites them, what a DM is able to hold in their mind versus just like, I make notes before every session I run and usually don't even look at them. It's just I'm not holding them. I'm trying to deal with all these maniacs who are trying to, burn everything to the ground. So it felt important to, as you said, give a toolbox and or a toy box where it's like, here are all the things you can do. You can make anything. Here's some examples of things you can make, go, and really let them take out the Legos that they wanted to take and put together something that makes sense for them.
This question is always a little bit awkward, I find, so apologies in advance, but what would you say was the most challenging part of creating Planegea? Because obviously, like, it's completed, it's done. But did you struggle from writer's block at all? Or was there something that you're like, how do I talk about this?
Oh yeah, no, not awkward for me at all. I am an absolute idiot about numbers. I think I made the no number over 9. It's just for myself. Like I actually would like to live in that world where it's just 1 through 9 and then many. So yeah, I really depended on the community and especially this core group of brilliant writers and developers who came around and formed sort of the Planegea, we call it the story team, who are just completely brilliant, able to remember a number for more than 5 seconds and actually interpret meaning from it. So the monster design, I worked with a brilliant designer named Daniel Gable, who really put together the mechanics. I would sort of draft all of the lore, all of the pros about it, and even sometimes throw in like, I think it should be big and strong. I think it should have like these kind of attacks. And then he would take that and wrestle it into actual playable. Right. Same for, I drafted the majority of the spells. Right. But then, for all of them, every single one, it was like, David, this is insane. This is way too powerful. Or when would anyone ever use this? The specifics of the mechanics were for sure super challenging. And then of course, the balance between what is sort of upfront in the player section and what's upfront in the DM section, that guidance sloshed back and forth between those two chapters, finding the right balance of telling the player enough, but not too much.
Yeah, exactly.
Giving the DM, like you said, the tools that they need without sort of overwhelming them. I think there are like 30 pages written and laid out with examples and mechanics for how to run hunts, crafting adventures, and gathering adventures that just got pulled and are now like a paragraph because it was just like too deep and too much. Right. And so it was a real wrestle. I think I wrote and rewrote the DM's chapter more than any other part of the book, just to find that balance.
And it's such a tricky one to do as well, because like you said, you don't want the players to know everything, but you want to give them a decent primer because they're being not thrown in. I'm sure they said yes to going into this world, but there's just something for them to sort of like look at and go, oh, and get excited for, I think.
Yeah. So then I'll also say, I'm sorry, but I do want to mention the one last thing is I changed as a person over the writing of this book. I started in 2019 and very inspired by Lankmar and the Stargate movie and 10,000 BC and all these things that have a lot to do with slavery and oppression and inherent racism. And so when I started writing the book, I was like, that is a trope of sword and sorcery. That should be a trope of this. And I had no understanding of how that would affect others. Through 2020 and the last couple of years, I learned a lot and really adapted what's in the book. And I think it's so much better as a result of it. But to be honest, there are still elements that I don't think I caught everything. I think there are things that linger. And I think there are perhaps harms that I don't want to perpetuate in the book. And so I think what's most difficult to write? What was the most challenge? I think starting from a place of like, that is a core assumption because of the tropes. And then being like, why is that right? Is that good? No. How then do I unwind that without unmaking everything? Because that was where I sort of started. Yeah, that was a major challenge, super worthwhile. I hope that I did the topic service. Anywhere that I didn't, I just like definitely acknowledge the gaps there. Yes. We're just seeking to continue to improve.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, because it is hard to uncouple that bias when you don't, you're just learning about it, but you do an amazing job of acknowledging it, saying, slavery is bad. You say that in the book. Yep. It's bad. And then you do it. In all the places you're like, this is not okay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I do think you do your best. That's such a rubbish way of saying it, but I think I totally see that. And I appreciate you mentioning that as well, because sometimes people, like you said, some other people might not have noticed it at all and not said anything about it. But the fact that you noticed it was a big trope and you wanted to change that and change the work, and amazing. So on the flip side of that question, what was your favorite part to do? Was there a particular bit that you were like I know, like you said, you wrote obviously pages and pages and pages, but was there like a small bit that you were like, this is amazing and I want more people to play it, so more people to look at it, perhaps?
I mean, I just delighted in the factions and threats. Yes. I could have gone on and on those.
I can imagine.
I think it was just, it was so much fun to, first off, study how those things are presented in existing materials, sort of think about what I need and what I would want to run at the table, come up with, that's where you'll find the most NPCs in the book. I absolutely love interesting, challenging NPCs. Each one has sort of its own approach to magic, its own approach to warfare, whether how like subtle or obvious it is. And as well, I think 4 sort of adventure prompts per tier of play for each faction. So it's just like so many start here and go. It was such a rewarding, well, the threats have that, the factions have like jobs you can do. But it was such a rewarding network to create. And I did it by looking at, for the threats, it was by creature type originally. It was like, I need to have a meaningful threat for each of these creature types. And then for the factions, it was like, I need to have a meaningful either force for or opposition of the different classes. And so sort of like looking at and, asking yourself, not everyone plays with alignment, but what does law and chaos and good and evil look like in the world? And sort of taking these, it's almost like, I don't know, taking a couple of different sifters and sifting every idea through it and being like, does every race and every kinship and every class and every alignment have something cool and interesting to do?
Right.
Can a DM say, oh, you're a bard? I know exactly what I'm going to do with you out of this. And it was satisfying to see that all come together. Both
the faction table and the threats table. You can see like mix and match and have a look through. And it's a good 70 pages or so of all the stuff. You're like,
it's a lot.
I think you had fun writing that.
That was
cool.
A good time.
That just shows your passion. My sort of penultimate question is, if somebody was to pick up Planegea, what would be your main big advice or top tip for somebody who wants to run a game in this campaign setting?
That's a great question. I would say that the introduction, start with the first few pages, because the first chapter is Welcome to Planegea, and it really is intended to give you the primer and tell you what's in the book. So I'd say to start there. For my money, I would go to the threats. I would say, what kind of monster do you like running? What kind of campaign do you want? And they're also built to provide different like styles of fantasy, different sorts of play. So, and they mention it, this one is for heroic campaigns. This one is for horror. This one is for, just monster hunting hijinks. So I would probably start there. And then I would guess the other thing is, with a good session 0, what I like to do is introduce the setting, ask them what kind of monsters they want to fight, what kind of, feel of a game they want to have them build their characters, send you over their backstories, and then go from there. Because for my money, the best campaigns arise out of the players' backstories and the kind of monsters and threats that you personally find really rewarding to run.
Well, brilliant. Thank you, David, so much. That was, I was, when I saw it, I was like, 300 pages. Oh no. And then I was like, 300. And now at the end, I'm like, 300 pages. Oh yeah. So
well, good. That's a good conversion. We'll take it.
Yeah. It's like I said, you've really changed what I thought about like Stone Age adventures and stuff like that. So I was like, actually, there's so much you can do with it. My final question is, where can we find your work and what you're working on, and where can we get Planegea?
Amazing. Well, if you just search for Planegea, Planegea, it will come up. So we have Twitter, which has, I think it's pinned tweet, has a bunch of the relevant links to all of this, including where to buy and where to talk about it more. There's a very active Planegea subreddit and Discord server, which we would love to see you there. I'm on both all the time. We have relaunched our Patreon. So new material is coming out there, like the dwarves and the Primal Dragonborn, with an all Dragonborn and one-shot adventure that we just put out, which is super fun. I think those are probably the best places. Yeah. So we have an Instagram, which is just showing the art from the setting, which is lots of fun. So wherever you want to be, hopefully we've got at least got a toe in there.
Yeah. And I will say, I had a quick look at the community. There's so much artwork, so much fan art, and that is super cute. I'm very excited when I see that sort of thing. So clearly, you've definitely made a setting that people are excited to play in, and certainly I am excited to play in. So kudos, David. Kudos.
Thank you, thank you very much. That's very kind. It's been an adventure, and it's been all done with the people who were into it from the beginning. So, it was from day one, it's been, let me write a page and post that page and get people's thoughts. So everything that is good about the book is arising because not only of my passion, but the passion of so many other people who gave their thoughts and honed it from the beginning. So I'm glad folks enjoy it. And I enjoy enjoying it alongside everyone else.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thank you. It's been total pleasure.